So NATO's top commander was just telling us that there is a high likelihood of a two-front war that could plunge the world into chaos, and it's coming within a year and a half. Here is the top commander. His name is Grenkowicz. NATO's general, the West, has only a year and a half to prepare for war with Russia and China, he says. Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General Alexis Grenkowicz, warned in 2027 a simultaneous attack is possible. Russia on Europe, China on Taiwan. The West must be ready. Quote, "We will need everything, weapons, ammunition, equipment," he said. The German government is seriously concerned about this. They fear that Putin may strike one of NATO's eastern flank countries even before 2029. That's when the NATO countries feel like they'll have sufficient strength to fight off Russia. But I talked about this the other day, and now I want to show you this. Two things here. First, here's China's response. China is just saying Taiwan is part of China, period. That's it. End of story. And they're still coming for Taiwan. They're still on that trajectory. And then here's something else going on. There's some carrier groups doing some training, some preparing for this kind of thing. Carriers USS George Washington and HMS Prince of Wales, along with their strike groups, are operating in the Timor Sea near Australia. U.S. and allied forces are conducting Talisman Sabre 25 and Reforpac 25 simultaneously, surging a massive number of assets into the Pacific. So they're doing maneuvers, training for such a possibility. Now, I want you to hear the commander Grenkowicz talking about this, and what he's shown in the background here is Bucha, and he's talking about what's happened in Ukraine. That's the context of what you're about to hear for the next 20-30 seconds.
Those are Russian tanks that are destroyed in the streets, demonstrating the threat that Ukraine faces and that the alliance faces even today. War persists on our doorstep in Ukraine.
Yep.
And while we seek a peaceful resolution, even if that resolution comes, the Russian capabilities that are there will reconstitute, and just by their very existence will be something that we'll have to think of from a military perspective and understand how it threatens the alliance and the freedoms that we hold dear. Russia will undoubtedly, in my mind, remain an enduring threat. But they're not the only threat.
Yep. So Russia is an enduring threat, and they have to think and deal with Russia as the enduring threat that it is. Okay. Meanwhile, Lukashenko's system is amping up. Believe it or not, Lukashenko is doubling and tripling his spending. Look at this. Belarus's military budget is ballooning. That's got its neighbors worried. Now, they're going to be terrible fighters, but they're still, as they're amping up, and look at what they're spending on too. Belarus has increased its spending on weaponry and the military hardware sharply since 2022. Budget numbers show. The increase coincides with Russia's all-out war on Ukraine and has worried its immediate neighbors. Government spending on military-related items, including sophisticated Russian fighter jets and modern attack helicopters, grew more than 2.5 times over the past 3 years, according to its budget. 2025 budget for all defense spending now totals around 4.7 billion Belarusian rubles. That's $1.6 billion US dollars, or around 2% of the country's gross domestic product. That's up from 1.8 billion or 694 million in 2022. Now, what are they spending on? Among the weapons being purchased are advanced Sukhoi 30 SM-2 multi-role fighter jets, Mi-35 attack helicopters, Voldat-2 V2 armored personnel carriers, along with hundreds of attack drones. Like, drones are going to be the future. Like, that's what's going to be happening in whatever war comes next. Okay, now I just talked about this, about how are we closer to the brink? This just made World War III more likely. It was the last video I just put out, just talking about how, like, we keep taking these incremental steps. And in that, I was showing why I said that. But then I showed you this list of, like, okay, you know that NATO has its interlocking peace or Article 5 agreements, but so does the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which I don't know how strong it is or how well it'll hold together. But if Russia is attacked, or if Russia attacks a NATO nation and then it's attacked in return, well, Belarus will get sucked in, no doubt. Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, theoretically Armenia are supposed to also be behind it, let alone North Korea, which is another nuclear power. And then it's a question about how much China would back that play, or maybe China and India, or that sort of thing, because I mean, they're more cozy with Russia. But the U.S. also has to think about simultaneously what's going on with Japan, because they have a bilateral to South Korea, Philippines, Australia, and Thailand. And then there's Australia, New Zealand, U.S. pact. And so what will happen if something kicks off in China with Taiwan and that sort of thing? Okay, with that being said, let's switch our attention to sanctions, and then we'll come back a little bit to that sort of question. Russia's so-called shadow fleet is not in any kind of shade. We know, says Gabrielas Landsbergis, the foreign minister from Lithuania, we know which ships are doing the dirty work to fill the Kremlin's coffers. So we can block another 10% of them. We can also block 100% of them. We know where they are. Listen to what he has to say.
Using roughly, I would probably point out that the most important thing is sanctioning a significant number of shadow fleet ships. This has been, I would say, a number one means of Russia getting its oil through the Baltic Sea out to the world markets. And they've been using roughly, from 800 to 1,000 different ships. So sanctioning at least 10% of that, that's a step forward. Will it stop the war? Well, unfortunately, I don't think so. It has always puzzled me why, knowing which ships do the transfers, carry the oil, knowing the number of ships, probably knowing the name of ships, still go in incremental steps towards sanctioning them all. Why?
Yeah, why wouldn't we just do all of them? So if we're looking at what happened with the sanctions yesterday, the EU unveiled the details of the 18 sanctions. Why not sanctions all of them? But they're not. But this is the toughest package that they've had so far. And theoretically, it is. Sanctioning hit 22 banks, including T-Bank, Yandex Bank, and Ozon Bank, 18 individuals, 41 companies. All transactions with Nord Stream 2, and the Russian Direct Investment Fund are now dead. Garry Kasparov said with that, at last, it took 11 years, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian casualties, dozens of destroyed cities. Energy security that depends on dictatorships is no security at all. And he's replying to this as the end. Nord Stream saga is finally over for good, 20 years after it was launched by Schroeder and Putin. So Nord Stream is no longer, it's banned. And the price cap on Russian oil has been lowered from 60 to 47.6 per barrel, with automatic reviews going forward. So as I was saying yesterday, I think it floats in that it's not floating automatically, but there are reviews that will reset it. It's down 15% of what it, or something like that, 15% over the regular market price, and it will be reviewed to be indexed again. For the first time, sanctions were imposed on Rosneft's refinery in India. The Indians are not happy about that. If we look at this, India criticized the new EU sanctions against Russia, how they affected it, and because they're soaking up that sweet oil from Russia cheap, and they want to keep soaking it up cheap. Kremlin is scrambling to downplay the EU's crushing new sanctions. Well, it's crushing in some regards, and others, they could do more. But it's still more, and more is better. Russia's top officials claim immunity, but signs of economic strain are beginning to show beneath the surface. Now, here's some things that are interesting. Robin Brooks does this, and he shows where countries are spending or shipping goods and that sort of thing, and how they're evading sanctions. Well, China today released June trade data. Its exports to Nauru, the third smallest country in the world after the Vatican and Monaco, are up by 6,000% from a year ago, a symptom of how powerfully U.S. tariffs are hitting China, pushing a flood of Chinese exports elsewhere. So if you think that the talk about tariffs are just meaningless talk, no, so they're going around sanctions just like the Europeans are going around, they're going around tariffs just like Europeans are going around sanctions, and it's off the chart. Right? Okay. So China is to build a 100. Now, I had this conversation with another UA-tuber about, well, if China and India weigh in behind Russia, well, China might. I don't know. I don't think India will. China and India tend to be at odds with each other. Yes, but they're still both part of the BRICS, but they don't really like each other. And here's one more piece of that I was suggesting, that I don't think China and India would weigh in at the same time behind Russia. Okay, China to build a $160 billion dam in Tibet risks escalation with India. China has launched one of the most expensive infrastructure projects in its history, a $167 billion dam in Tibet, and it could create all kinds of problems, ecological and otherwise, draining the water from the river that goes into Indian territory. The dam flows through India. The river feeds a river that goes through Indian territory. That's the same kind of thing that was causing the war with Pakistan earlier. So I don't know that they're going to be that chummy, but okay. Last little bit about Europe before I switch gears to what's going on in the United States and how Patriots and spending for Ukraine goes with the U.S. Latvia may deport over 800 Russians due to expired residency permits. So they're serious about this in the Baltic states. Latvia's Office of Citizenship and Migration Affairs has notified 841 Russian citizens that their residence permits have expired. To stay legally, they must obtain EU long-term resident status. Those who fail to comply face deportation. They're not joking in the Baltic states. They're minding the borders. They're preparing defenses. They're throwing Russians out. They're not allowing them to buy real estate. It's going on and on. Okay, let's look at what's happening with the U.S., with Patriots, and then with defense spending for Ukraine, and it's positive news. Patriot systems, Germany promised to send to Ukraine, will only be ready in 6 to 8 months. That's not the positive news. Bild reports, citing a German government source. Originally, the plan was for the U.S. to supply air defense while Germany financed replenishment, but Trump declared the U.S. military won't give up a single unit. Europe must provide from its own stockpile. So what are they doing? They're reshuffling arms to free up more Patriots for Ukraine. Well, how are they doing it? So I talked about this the other day, that they were going to be taking from what was going to the Swiss. And, the Swiss are probably the least likely to be in any danger here. But it's not just taking from the Swiss. It's actually a little bit more of a shuffle. The U.S. is reshuffling its Patriot air defense systems deliveries to get more of them to Ukraine faster, according to the Wall Street Journal. And this was just yesterday. Switzerland has been bumped down the queue in favor of Germany, allowing Berlin to then send 2 Patriot systems it already possesses directly to Ukraine. So that's how they're working that out. And by the way, I try to update this every day. If you want to stay informed, like, share, subscribe, so please hit that subscribe button and you'll hear more about this daily. I'll keep you updated. You can break up with me later. Okay, what's going on with the military budget? Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene tried to put an amendment in to remove the funding for Ukraine. This morning, the House overwhelmingly voted to continue providing military support to Ukraine by a 353 to 76 vote on that issue. And the budget passed. And so, I want to go back to something here because this is really important. So I showed you this video. Let me show you this one here. You wouldn't believe it if I told you otherwise, but Republicans are now overwhelmingly supporting Ukraine in a recent poll, and that's because Trump became in favor of Ukraine. So as Trump goes, so will go the Republican Party. Go back to this video. I'm not making this up. And so what you're seeing here is the U.S. House passed an $832 billion defense bill after rejecting a ban on Ukraine aid. Like that, they increased it in committee, and then they supported it pretty significantly in the actual vote for the defense bill. Lawmakers overwhelmingly rejected an attempt to cut Ukraine funding as part of the new defense bill. So that's where Republicans now are. They're moving that direction, and it's pretty amazing to watch. Okay, I don't know how important this will be to anything that we're talking about, but I know it's important. Trump signs a historic U.S. crypto law called Genius, the Genius Act. Genius establishes a legal framework for crypto transactions and strengthens oversight stablecoin issuers. This marks the first major step toward federally regulated crypto markets in the United States. Now, I'll admit, when the internet came out, I was like, internet? How can anybody sell anything online? This doesn't make any sense to me. I didn't get it, but that was in the early days back in 1995. Same thing with crypto. I'm not sure exactly why it's important, but I know that it is important. So we'll just leave it at that. Okay, last little bit that I want to show you is this. This is possibly the single greatest male athletic performance of all time. This guy has a beer in one hand. He has his kid in the other. He drops his kid for a second, catches the kid or catches the ball, then catches the kid, doesn't really spill his beer. And I think that's a metaphor for what the world is like right now, where it's just like you got to get everything exactly right. And so when we're talking about this general talking about like, look, World War III could be on the horizon with a Russia attack in Europe and a Chinese attack in of Taiwan, which would draw in other powers in the East. Like, we've just got to get it right. And so best analogy I could come up with here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.